Alright. Gonna need this. And this too. Definitely not gonna need that. I think we're good to go. So if you've been on this channel for a while, you'd know that one of my first countdowns was on my favorite levels in video games. Needless to say, that video is pretty outdated, aside from the entries themselves, but one thing I do stand by from that video is that levels are a great way of structuring a game, as long as they don't suck. At their best, levels can be one of the highlights of the game, showing off creative level design and fun challenges for you to overcome. But at their worst, they can be a tedious drag or a frustrating mess with nothing imaginative and just not fun. And because this video has a title, you'd know that's exactly what we're going to talk about. I think there's not much else that needs to be said, so let's get rolling. So you all know how Sly Cooper is basically my life's blood? Yeah, despite how much I love these games, I can say with some confidence that all of the games have flaws. And this especially applies to Sly 2. Don't get me wrong, I still love this game a lot, and there's definitely enough good to outweigh all the bad things, but whenever I have to go through Starry-Eyed Encounter or Predator Wakes, well, fuck me sideways. Now, I think I can get away with having these two on the same spot because 1, they're both presided by the same villain, and 2, they suck for very similar reasons. The main reason being that they're both so fucking boring. I mean, Starry-Eyed Encounter has a better aesthetic and atmosphere, but it's completely dragged down by mostly uninteresting missions. And Predator Wakes is pretty much the same thing, with a boring overworld on top of the boring missions. And when the missions aren't boring, they're tedious as hell. Missions like Elephant Rampage and Waterbuck Run are just a few examples of this, and they make the levels so much worse. In addition, the layout of the levels makes it that if you're not playing as Sly, navigation is a bitch. Now, I know getting around with Bentley and Murray is harder in almost every level, but these two are definitely the worst offenders. What drags these two at number 10 though, is the fact that there are still a handful of pretty enjoyable missions across the episodes, one of which is actually one of my favorites in the series. But even still, whenever I replay Sly 2, these two are the ones I want to get done quickest. You can only take so much bland in your level design after all. Fire Emblem is all about that strategy. One false move and a precious unit could be lost forever. Unless you're using save states, or playing any game post-awakening. Anyway, the reason I bring this up is because some Fire Emblem games have this nasty habit of limiting your options to strategize on certain maps. And by that I mean that the game gives you an unnecessary hindrance that only works against you and not the enemy. And the GBA Fire Emblem games just love that fog of war. So basically, if you don't know, maps with Fog of War are filled with fog or darkness that makes the enemies inside it impossible to see. And this can really screw you over since you can't really position your units to prepare for what's coming. Sure, thieves and torches do help a lot, but using them have their drawbacks. So what if I told you that there's a Fog of War chapter filled with narrow corridors, promoted units up the ass, 2 recruitable units that both need to stay alive, and an NPC you have to protect? Yeah! Kill me! Battle Before Dawn from Blazing Sword is one of the most infamous chapters in the series, and it's not hard to see why. Like I said, there are 2 recruitable units in this chapter, and to get them most efficiently, you need to split into 2 groups. And unless you're using 2 thieves for some reason, your other group better have a lot of torches. Oh, and did I mention that both Nino and Jafar are fragile as fuck? Sure, both of them can hold their own for a while, but they'll eventually run out of those elixirs. And RNG hates me, so also death. And you need to get them both to get the next Gaiden chapter. Have fun! And on top of all that, you need to protect Prince Zephiel, and if a promoted enemy unit gets close to him, you might as well just reset and start over. The chapter does get some points for being pretty great story-wise, but overall, not even that is enough to excuse this horrible excuse of a map. Water levels are fun, am I right? Especially when they change the mechanics of the game for that segment only. That is my fetish. So the original Kingdom Hearts is, for the most part, a pretty fun hack and slash RPG hybrid. And exploring Disney worlds? Yeah, it's pretty great. Unless you're in Atlantica, that is. The main problem with this world is, like I hinted at earlier, the way it alters how you play the game with underwater swimming controls. And these controls are terrible. They give you very little maneuverability, combat is clunky as hell thanks to it, and even just moving around is a pain. And to add to the already limited moving options, the game also takes away some of your default abilities, like the dodge roll and guarding. This makes Sora's defensive options pretty much null and void, making most encounters with stronger enemies and bosses a lot harder than they probably should be. Your only option at this point is to pray and hope you have enough MP to heal off all the punishment, or that Donald's got it. Add in the open-ended and empty level design of every KH1 world, and some pretty annoying, but somehow also unmemorable boss fights, and I just never want to come here again. Can we go back to dry land now? I'd even take discount Star Fox at this point. That sounds way more fun. So you know how poison is one of the most annoying status ailments in RPGs? I mean, it's worse in some and less so in others, but poison still has the effect of causing damage over time. And if you ask me, that shit should be healed right off. But for some reason, someone at level 5 thought that making a dungeon solely based around the status ailment was a good idea. Spoilers, it actually wasn't. And Ni no Kuni's dungeons were so great up until this point. Miasma Marshes is nothing more than a generic-looking poison swamp, which only serves the purpose of being spooky, I guess. I'm not a huge fan of swamp-themed levels in general, but this one just takes it to a whole new level. As its name entails, Miasma Marshes is filled with miasma, a poisonous substance. And because of this, touching the water in this place will inflict poison on all of your party members. Not just that, but some of the enemies can also do the same thing to you, so you better have stacked up on those poison begons. Wait, what's this? You can avoid the poison water by using the levitation spell you got earlier in the game? Well, fuck me sideways! How am I supposed to remember this spell I used once, got alongside some other useless / situational spells, and was never taught to use properly other than a vague description? Combine this with the uninspired design and you've got easily the worst part of Ni no Kuni for me. The only thing that really saves it from being higher is that the boss is pretty decent, and everything that happens afterwards is both gameplay and story-wise the best part of the game. So yeah, it might be bleak and literally hazardous, but at least there's some light at the end of the tunnel. We be sleeping with the fishes tonight. So I'm not a huge fan of the new Super Mario Bros. Games, but sometimes I just like to indulge in a solid 2D platformer. And hey, I was really enjoying New Super Mario Bros. U. I mean, there's really nothing different between this and all the other games of its kind, but there was something about this game that just clicked with me. know? My money's on the flying squirrel suit. But nothing good can last forever, right? So the developers thought that it would be a great idea to cut on this thing called fun and replace it with frustration and misery. So the main gimmick of Above the Cheep Cheep Seas is that you're literally platforming above a sea full of Cheep Cheep and they're all out to get you. Now this wouldn't be such a problem if A. the Cheep Cheep didn't come at you from every direction with no pattern to their movement, B. the several water pillars throughout the level didn't elevate the Cheep Cheep, making their movement even more unpredictable, and C. there wasn't fucking hundreds of them. It's one thing to make a difficult level, and entirely another to fill the level with enemies that are constantly moving towards you, and touching them anywhere but above means death. So if you're not a god at Mario, or don't have the right power-ups, the most manageable way to complete this level is to use the Starman hidden throughout the level, but keeping the chain going is easier said than done. And to top it all off, thanks to the game's stupid saving system, if you somehow make it through this level and you get a game over later in the world, you have to start all the way from the last save point, which basically amounts to doing this nonsense all over again. You know, that sleeping with the fishes idea might not be so bad after all. You ever have one of those days when you just... Now, Ratchet & Clank 3 is a game I hold very near and dear to me. Not only is it a pretty fucking solid game, but I also have a lot of memories with it, and that just makes this game all the more special to me. However, not all my memories with RNC3 are positive ones, and I think I have a personal vendetta against the person who allowed Crash Site to be a thing that exists in this game. Technically speaking, there's nothing wrong with this level, I guess, but for me this planet has always felt like a difficulty spike. Not only are there some of the strongest enemy types in the game, but their numbers match that of the endgame levels. A lot of the time you can find yourself surrounded by strong enemies, ambushed by a big one, or both, and even with the strongest available armor, these guys can deliver a ton of damage. And that's not even mentioning the numerous insta-death pitfalls, the fact that there are only 2 checkpoints in the entire level, and that the nanopack resides in this level and requires extremely precise platforming. I mean, sure, it's optional, but it's a pretty useful item to have in the long run, and the fact that getting it is so tedious is just... I won't lie to you. The main reason why I have such a distaste for this level is because of personal assault and the negative memories of how I sucked in this level when I was younger. But even now, when I can actually finish this level without too much trouble, conquering it just doesn't feel satisfying. And even then, when I compare it to some of the other planets in RNC3, Crash Site doesn't stand out in the slightest. And that, my friends, is what we call the final nail to the coffin. When it comes to my aesthetics with video game levels, sand is definitely not up there. Most sand levels for me feel like lifeless waste of space, and sometimes just a familiar desert-like theme is enough for me to get turned off a level. Of course there are exceptions, but sand levels mostly spent their time being boring. And someone at Naughty Dog thought that filling a mine level full of sand and rocks and the color gray would make for the most exciting design ever. Oh boy! Strip Mine from Jak 2 is a textbook example of a boring level filled with sand. Look at this! Do you like all this gray? I hope you do, because it's all you're going to see when you're in here. I mean, there's all this mine equipment to remind you that this is not a desert, but it doesn't help very much when it's also gray, just like everything else here. Though mind you, the color palette is the least of this level's problems, because out of the 3 times you're sent here, 2 of them are among some of the worst missions in the game. Rescuing Vin is manageable, but it's also fucking annoying, with enemies spawning everywhere in the beginning of the level, and throwing the bombs into the eco wells is fucking frustrating with an arbitrary 2-minute time limit, and oh my god, I pressed the fucking button, why didn't you throw it, you piece of shit? Now to be fair, the third mission isn't all that bad because it has some actual platforming, and there's a mission that I consider much worse than any in the strip mine, but that's just one mission. Strip Mine's got an uninspired design, 2 missions that I dread going through, and overall this level just feels dead. And also, it's kinda sad that there's actually a version of this level that's pretty good in a game that wasn't made by Naughty Dog. What could that mean, I wonder? So you know how having a final boss that's built up throughout most of the game and then have it suck in the end is really disappointing? Well, in my experience, I found out that you can do the same thing with final levels. And when it comes to disappointments, Tales of Xillia 2 is a gift that just keeps on giving. So Land of Canaan is a place that's mentioned more than a few times in the story as a place that can grant wishes. And one of your main goals in the game is to get this little girl named Elle to Canaan, mainly because she never shuts up about it. But when you finally reach Canaan at the end of the game, yeah, it's shit. Let's start with the design. What the fuck is this, Namco? No, really, what is this? I see nothing but a giant cloud of miasma and some pathways. Is that what you call level design? I mean, the Tales games don't really have most interesting levels, but at least they're aesthetically pleasing and fun to explore for the most part. But here, get used to this darkness, because it's all you're going to see as you go back and forth trying to find the paths that lead you forward. Yeah, because a fucking maze is what I need on top of this! And then there's the matter of Xillia 2's tendency to force you to have only 4 party members. I mean, at least this time you can actually choose who to take with you, but this is the final battle! Why do we still need to have arbitrary reasons to push more of the first game's cast out of the party? Add in some uninspired enemy designs that are just dark versions of the enemies you've been fighting throughout the whole game, and you've got yourself a thoroughly awful and disappointing final level. And it's such a shame since the final levels in Tales games are usually some of the best dungeons they have to offer, and this just leaves a really bad taste in my mouth. At least the final boss is pretty good. What can be said about The Legend of Zelda and its water dungeon? They suck! They all suck. Okay, so maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration since there have been good water levels in Zelda, but you can't deny the infamy this series has gotten over them. And after playing through the likes of Ocarina of Time's Water Temple and Majora's Mask's Great Bay Temple, I can see that this infamy is very well deserved. And yet, for some reason, the dungeon I chose for this list is apparently not that bad. Oops. Now, if you think Lakebed Temple is tolerable, or hell, if it's one of those water dungeons you actually like, I can totally see that. Because from a technical standpoint, it isn't nearly as boring or frustrating as those 2 other dungeons I mentioned. But my experience with the Lakebed Temple has been really muddy. My first time through this game, I thought the dungeon was confusing. I got lost many times, I didn't understand the gimmick very well, and I wasn't having any fun. To the point where I actually remember taking a break from playing Twilight Princess after finishing the dungeon. Admittedly, it was a lot easier when I replayed the game, but I also noticed some other problems. The dungeon item, while awesome, I think isn't used very well. Say what you will about City in the Sky, though that place is also fucking trash, but at least it used a double claw shot in some really cool ways. In Lakebed Temple though, you'll mostly be trying to attach onto these gears and wait as they slowly move you forward. Is this supposed to be fun? Question mark? And then we have the most frustrating mini-boss as well as the worst boss in the game in the form of Morpheal, which sucks because Twilight Princess has some really great bosses and this is just no. Again, I can see why someone wouldn't consider this level that bad, and I can't say I really hate it myself. But I feel that my bad experiences with this place combined with the questionable design choices justify my placement here. Basically what I'm saying here is, chalk it up to my personal salt. We've come far, seen a lot of shit, but here are a few dishonorable mentions before we wrap up this dung pile. The Hollow Forest from Persona 4 Golden, Fumbling in the Dark from Crash Bandicoot, Funhouse Frazzle from Cuphead, The Great Maze from Super Smash Bros. Brawl, Lefay Shrine from Tales of Zestiria, Lakebed Temple from The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, and Mount Coronet from Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. You guys know the saying, there are no bad ideas, only bad executions? Because I'd say video game levels are probably some of the biggest examples of this. Even on this list we've seen a few cool ideas that were just executed horribly. But to me, there's no idea gone more wrong in its execution than Eggman Land from Sonic Unleashed. I'm just going to clarify that while I'm including both versions of the level, the HD version is the one that makes me depressed. I genuinely like the idea of combining the two styles of gameplay for this one final level. The problem is that since normal Sonic and the Werehog are so different in terms of gameplay, it becomes really hard to mix the two together fluidly. Guess what happened here? And even then, aside from the whole level becoming this unfocused mess of set pieces all over the place, Eggman Land is one of the most frustrating experiences in the entire series. I mean, high difficulty is kind of a given for a final level, but there hasn't been much of a gradual rise in difficulty in the levels before this, and I swear there are times, especially in the daytime sections, where you just die to things you can't see coming. And the length of the level is just no. There are 5 acts in the PS2 version, and each takes around 10 minutes to complete, while the HD version can take as much as an hour, and that's just fucking ridiculous. And on a bit more personal note, due to getting a game over very near the end after spending over an hour in this place, Eggman Land was the main reason why it took me a while to beat Unleashed. The other levels on this list might be really bad, but at least they didn't make me put off the game for almost a year. I'm FinnishDuck, and considering what kind of place Eggman Land is, I think it's for the best that Eggman never builds anything ever. Because frankly, if I was forced to spend any prolonged time in a place like that, well, let's just say there's many things I'd rather be doing.
In the future we'll decide if there's a hero buried deep inside. I wanna be a hero. Pokemon!
Hello, welcome to the end of the video, and thanks for watching! My military service has come to an end, and I'm back in full force, ready to produce some quality stuff for you guys. That before July promise didn't really hold, but it's whatever. I'm planning to do an update video where I go into detail on what I'm gonna do now that I'm free, as well as some general stuff about the channel's future, so I won't go too much on about it here. You know how these things work.